Hi, I'm Dan, and welcome to Sky Pilot Faith Quest Podcast, the video version. And before we get started, be sure to click on the like, subscribe, and ring that mysterious bell. Those all do amazing things for helping others discover this channel. Now, we begin today with a refreshing, that's not quite right, with a nippy, no, that's still not, okay, bone-chilling, that's it, a bone-chilling dip in a river. We discuss what really happens when the worst happens. We take a look at the first 3 steps on what might be one of life's hardest journeys, all on the way to answering the question, can you borrow faith? Welcome to the Sky Pilot Podcast that explores questions of faith, spirituality, and religion. I'm Dan Matthews, and I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy the questions. Welcome to the podcast where every question is an invitation into a spiritual quest, and you're invited along for the journey. Okay, many years ago when my wife, Sarah, was just about to finish college, she and her apartment mate, Lisa, were enjoying an unseasonably warm early spring day in Knoxville, Tennessee. They found themselves walking along the Tennessee River in a beautiful park that ambles along between the river and a local neighborhood. And at one point, they were approaching the bank of the river. They noticed a commotion there amongst a group of people. Evidently, a young college kid had decided that the day being so warm demanded that he take his shirt off and go for a swim. Forget the fact that the water hadn't warmed up at all. He was going for a swim. He got a little ways from shore, not really probably paying attention to what his body was trying to tell him, and the cold water began to get the better of him. When Sarah and Lisa arrived, he was already in trouble. His friends who were on the shore knew something wasn't right, and they were trying to coax him back, but it wasn't working. By that point, his muscles were beginning to slow down, his thinking was sluggish, and it was clear he was not going to make it back on his own. Now, the first rule of lifeguarding you learn when you train as a lifeguard, because a little while after this, I got trained as a lifeguard, is that when someone is in trouble, when someone's in distress in the water, there's an order in which you attempt to rescue them. You reach, you throw, you row, and then you go. Reach, throw, row, go. Always in that order. But in this particular case, he was too far for them to reach him. There was nothing available for them to throw. He was too far away for that anyway. Even if they had a life preserver on a line, they couldn't have thrown it that far. There were certainly no boats available of any kind. No, in this case, if he was going to be saved, they were going to have to go get him. Now, long story short, they took off their shoes and the 2 friends entered the water and retrieved him. They saved him. It was actually a touching story. The young man told his mom about this rescue, and for a number of years after the rescue, Sarah got a thank you card. I'm guessing Lisa did too, from his mom every year on his birthday. One of the interesting things about this story that I didn't tell you is Sarah's reaction to entering the water. The water was cold, really, really cold. The experience of entering the water was so much colder than Sarah had expected, and it took everything she had as they were wading deeper and deeper into the cold waters of the Tennessee River to force herself to keep going. And as Sarah tells the story, there was only one thing that kept her moving forward. Now, you might think at this moment, as you're listening to this story, oh, I know exactly what it is. It was the fact that the young man's life was on the line, but the truth is that wasn't it. That got her to make the decision to go after him, but that wasn't the motivation for continuing to move forward. I think the shock of the cold water left her only thinking about the immediate now as she was wading in. What kept her moving forward was looking over right next to her and seeing her friend with her. Lisa was still there. Like her, Lisa was still moving forward. And as long as Lisa was there, she drew strength and willpower that she needed to go forward from her friend. So together, they plunged into the cold river water and kept going. Now, this story, although fairly simple story, has a lot of elements to it. And one of the things I've learned on the internet is that telling a story invites judgment. Someone always wants to correct you. They know better how the situation should have been handled. Maybe that's you. Maybe you want to judge their decision to make the effort to save him. First, let me say that's really not the point here. I'm not offering this up for a vote. Also, if you have a deep need to make that point to me, sure, go ahead, do so. I mean, you're not changing my mind. You're not changing Sarah's and Lisa's mind. You're not changing this kid's mom's mind about whether or not they should have gone in, but go ahead. I will also add this that I didn't say as I was telling the story. I was there, actually, when it happened. Now, I'm a pretty strong swimmer, but both of them are much stronger swimmers than I am. It was never really a question at the moment. They were the only people capable enough to attempt a response. So they did. Okay, now let's move on to my point. There is a spiritual element to this story. Now, that's not quite right, is it? There's a lesson to be gleaned from this story. This story works well as a parable about our faith life. The life of a person of faith, even the life of a person who's a non-believer for that matter, can be filled with wonderful experiences and joy, but also hardship, challenges, and just plain uncertainty. And back when I was studying psychology, I read many, many times that married couples who experienced the loss of a child had something like a 95% divorce rate. The explanation that I often read along with those numbers is that the couple can't get past the pain. They eventually go on their own separate ways. They just can't get over how much it hurts when they look at each other. I've known couples who have lost a child. I don't think there's anything that's more difficult in a marriage than the death of a child. Here's an interesting fact. About 50% of all marriages, at least in the United States, end in divorce. You certainly already knew that statistic. It is quoted all the time, all over the place. As I said, it used to be said that the divorce rate amongst couples who had suffered the loss of a child is even much higher than that, almost double that. But evidently, I just read recently, that wasn't from a study so much as somebody's anecdotal hunch. So here's the interesting thing that I want to share with you. There has been an honest-to-goodness study done now, and this is what they found. The divorce rate for couples who have suffered the loss of a child is something around 16%. And only 4% of those say it had anything to do with the child's death. It looks like actually the reliance on each other in what is arguably the worst thing that any parent could go through actually strengthened them. Okay, you might say to me at this point, yeah, there's strength in numbers. There's solace in community. We're all stronger when we're not alone. Great Dan, again, you are the master of the obvious. Those are things that everybody who is watching already knew. Yeah, okay, that's true. But that's not my point. I haven't made my point yet, but I'm getting to it. I have, in my journey in various parishes, had the experience of working with people who were wrestling with alcoholism. And these people frequently are working their way through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So let me tell you the first 3 steps. You might already know them, but let me remind you if you do. First step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Second step, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Third step, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. So here's the challenge that I have observed with some frequency. You're an alcoholic, and your life you have come to realize is being, destroyed by your drinking. You want to do something about it, but you've come to AA for help. You begin these first 3 steps, except for a fair number of people at this point, particularly in this day and age, they aren't church people, they aren't religious people, they aren't spiritual people. They are folks who have absolutely no faith, no belief system, nothing at all to rely on or to fall back on when they need to turn to a higher power, which is stated in these steps. Now, some of them early on in this process wander into church in search of something that will click for them. But very often attending a religious service is for many people at this particular juncture, it's not going to help them suddenly find God. They are really struggling. Their life, they're just barely holding it together at that point. And they have one, maybe two people, maybe a few more from their AA group who they trust. And as I said, other than that, they're just barely hanging on. They need God, but they can't find God, much less any form, any kind of coherent belief system. So now I'm going to share with you the advice that I have given a number of these people. Borrow someone else's faith. Very often at this stage, you don't have a faith. You don't have a faith at all. You don't even know where to begin. So, choose someone who you respect, who you see that they believe. And for the short term, until you can manage to have faith on your own, the first step is just start by believing that they believe. Eventually, the next step is you believe because they believe. And finally, if you stay there long enough, you find after a while, well, you eventually just believe on your own. And sometimes the faith you eventually wind up with doesn't even look like the faith that you borrowed in the beginning. Look, in the Episcopal Church, which is the church I grew up in, we say the Nicene Creed pretty much every single Sunday. Occasionally we say the Apostles' Creed instead, but for the most part, we say the Nicene Creed. We used to say, in my childhood, the Nicene Creed beginning with these words, I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Then, interestingly, about the time I was in high school, we changed just one word. We switched from saying, I believe, to we believe, which is to me a really powerful acknowledgement of this very reality. If we say I, then we're simply a group of disconnected individuals proclaiming our individual faith. But when we gather together to make a statement of belief and we say we, well, at that point, we are weaving a fabric of support for those who are with us, but in that moment, unable to foster belief. We start the creed with the words we believe, because in that moment, for those who are struggling or those who feel weak in their faith, we believe for them. Look, it's not just people working through the 12-step program for whom borrowing someone else's faith works. The truth is, the longer I'm alive, the more people I accumulate as people I occasionally borrow their faith. Oh, and I should say this, none of them know it because they don't need to. Some are famous people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa, a remarkable guy of faith and joy throughout his life who went through horrible abuse and yet kept his faith. And some are people I've encountered along the way, like Ed Campbell, who was a priest at my fieldwork site and seminary, who himself was a recovering alcoholic and a man of remarkable spiritual depth. All are people who I borrow or have borrowed their faith when I need some help. All are people who I keep going because I know they have kept going. But what happens if one of these people who I borrow their faith, who you borrow their faith, hits a time of disbelief? Doesn't that ruin this whole idea? No, I don't think it does. The point is not that some of us are saints and then there's the rest of us. The point is not that some of us are strong in faith and then there's the rest of us. The point is that we all need to rely on each other, to borrow each other's strength, each other's faith from time to time. As Sarah was wading into the cold waters of the Tennessee River, she drew strength, courage, and determination from the fact that her friend Lisa was right there at her side. So here's my question for you after that story. Does it ruin the story if Lisa was struggling herself and at the very same time was drawing strength from Sarah? Or does it make the story even better? I'll let you decide. That's all for today. I'm curious, though, how you react to this. Do you agree with the idea that we can and should draw strength, even borrow each other's faith from time to time? Oh, and do you have people like this who you borrow their faith during times of struggle? I'd love to hear about it. Leave me a comment in the comments section below. And on your journey, may you ask questions, seek answers, and boldly go wherever the quest takes you. Thanks for joining us here today and being part of the SkyPilot Faith Quest community. This is a great place to ask questions you wouldn't feel comfortable or safe asking in other places. And remember, the sign of a strong faith, solid religion, or healthy spiritual journey is not certainty, but that you keep asking questions.